So this is what happens. This is what happens when our president, Scott Postma, tries to find a book. Stacks go flying.
Everywhere. We have to dig.
Let's look for some poetry.
Hey folks, Scott Postma here, and I wanted to take just a second and talk to you about our summer course offerings at Kepler. Joffrey and I are going to tackle a few of these, tell you a little bit about them, but I wanted to let you know first that our summer courses begin June 29th. They end August 21st. That's an 8-week course. These are very reasonably priced, some great teachers, and so we want you to jump in here as soon as possible, and we'd like to tell you a little bit about them now.
Hi everybody, this is Joffrey Swait. I am the academic advisor at Kepler, which means I am your family's customer service rep, and I'm here with Scott Postma.
Hey Joffrey, how's it going?
Doing great. So today we wanted to talk about reading lists and summertime, and a couple of classes that will make for great reading this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a couple of really good classes lined up this summer.
So we have a class on the Space Trilogy.
Yes.
And then a class, a creative writing class that has Wordsworth, Bradbury, Hopkins.
Excellent classes.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
And as we started looking at the creative writing class, and I know you have the Space Trilogy in here somewhere, and then we looked at the creative writing class, and you were like, oh, that book's there, and that book's there. You guys can see that Mr. Postma has a pretty fantabulous library. So we actually pulled out some books so we could read a favorite or two.
Yeah.
So what about the Bradbury book?
Okay. So Ray Bradbury, this course, or this reading is going to go with the creative writing course, and of course Ray Bradbury, science fiction writer, but Dandelion Wine is the selection that Andy has for this course, and it's one of my favorite Ray Bradbury books. It's set in a summertime, a little kid kind of connected to his family, and there's an evil that's lurking in the city this summer in the night, and but they're going about their business making dandelion wine. It's kind of a family tradition. So this is a really a sort of rooted Mayberry with a looming dragon over it, if you kind of put it that way. And I'll just read just a real short piece. It says, "So with the subtlest of incidents, he knew that this day was going to be different. It would be different also because, as his father explained, driving Douglas and his 10-year-old brother Tom out of town toward the country, there were some days compounded completely of odor, nothing but the world blowing in one nostril and out the other. And some days," he went on, "were days of hearing every trump and trill of the universe. Some days were good for tasting and some for touching, and some days were good for all the senses at once. This day," he nodded, "smelled as if a great and nameless orchard had grown up overnight beyond the hills to fill the entire visible land with its warm freshness. The air felt like rain, but there were no clouds. Momentarily, a stranger might laugh off in the woods, but there was silence." It's kind of foreboding and exciting at the same time.
Yeah, and actually, I'm really glad you chose that brief little passage, because when I've read and reread Bradbury's short stories, of course, read the novella Fahrenheit 451, but I never read Dandelion Wine. But he always strikes me as a writer who, good writers are always so compelling with their visuals, right? Because reading is a visual exercise, and it awakens the visual imagination. But great writers, I think, do a good job of waking all the senses.
Exactly.
And I mean, he talks directly about a bunch of senses, but even when he says feels, I don't know, you kind of feel.
You do. You feel it. There's the sensual smells, the feeling, the air, and you kind of like you can almost put yourself right there. It actually does really good.
So we're actually going to impose upon you 2 more readings, because we just want to share with you our delight over. Hey, it's summer. It's time to read. Time to read with no pressure. I don't know how the teachers of these classes will feel about no pressure, but that's the nice thing about a summer class, is that you get to focus just on that class, and you don't have all these other academic pressures coming on you.
And who wouldn't want to spend 8 weeks reading Dandelion Wine?
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely.
So you have some Wordsworth,
Yep.
and I have some Hopkins. So Gerard Manley Hopkins, I suppose I should say Gerard, but Hopkins is my favorite all-time poet. And people credit him with inventing what's called sprung rhythm, which he himself said that he was just imitating Milton. Because a lot of our poetic scansion is basically it's based on romantic languages and their scansions, and Milton ignored that. He wrote as if he were an English speaker,
Right.
right. And so Hopkins emulated that, but Hopkins was also very self-consciously Anglo-Saxon. So not only does he use sprung rhythm, which you can look up and research yourself what that is, but he's very heavily alliterative. And so there's this lively rhythm, and I just love him. And I wanted to read to you guys a poem called "As Kingfishers Catch Fire." This is a classic, right? It's one of the ones that, if it's in a high school textbook, if he's in a high school textbook, this is one of the ones.
This is going to be in the anthology.
Yeah. As kingfishers catch fire. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim and roundy wells stones ring, like each tucked string tells each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Selves goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying what I do is me, for that I came. I say more, the just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces.
Excellent.
Give me chills, dude.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. This is poetry at its finest in terms of we think of the modern rap as kind of these guys are poets,
yes.
But this is kind of the origins of that of that use of it.
It sure is. And actually, so the viewer might find it interesting to know that Hopkins' poetry actually kind of time traveled, because he took Jesuit vows and refused to publish, except for a couple of poems after he became a Jesuit, but he kept writing. And most of his poems were published by Robert Bridges in 1918, some decades after his death.
Wow.
So they actually influenced the T.S. Eliot generation.
Yes.
So he time traveled and hit a whole different, but you can hear it in the poetry of the 20s and 30s and 40s.
Right.
Really just fascinating. But I should stop and let you read some Wordsworth.
Oh well, it's all fantastic. I love these different genres. Wordsworth, of course, we know is part of the lyric ballads. He and Coleridge published. That kind of launches the Romantic movement.
Right.
1799, I think, they're published. And Wordsworth, of course, really embodies in many ways this romantic disposition, this idea about the world. As a sort of response to the Enlightenment, we're going to elevate emotion, elevate imagination above reason, and also we're going to take on a sort of worldview that says, country living people are more righteous than city dwellers. To kind of put that in, so there's this sort of almost bucolic sort of feel to the poetry. And this poem I'm going to read is called "The Solitary Reaper," and you can kind of get the idea of what Coleridge is embodying, this romantic ideal.
Wordsworth.
Or Wordsworth, what did I say?
Coleridge, yeah.
Thank you.
Romantics.
So, they're romantics. So here's Wordsworth, "The Solitary Reaper." Behold her, single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing by herself. Stop here or gently pass. Alone she cuts and binds the grain and sings a melancholy strain. Oh, listen, for the vale profound is overflowing with the sound. No nightingale did ever chaunt more welcome notes to weary bands of travelers in some shady haunt among Arabian sands. A voice so trilling ne'er was heard in springtime from a cuckoo bird, breaking the silence of the seas among the farthest Hebrides. Will no one tell me what she sings? Perhaps the plaintive number flow for old unhappy far-off things and battles long ago? Or is it some more humble lay, familiar matter of today, some natural sorrow, loss, or pain? There has been and may be again. Whatever the thing, the maid sang, as if her song could never, as if her song could have no ending. I saw her singing at her work and o'er the sickle bending. I listened, motionless and still, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I bore. Long after it was heard no more. Yeah.
I like Wordsworth for a particular reason. So I have some favorite romantic poems out there, Shelley, Coleridge, but there's a tendency sometimes in romantic poetry to voyage too far, maybe.
Yes.
And the thing, you think about Shelley, but when with Wordsworth, he always brings it home,
Right.
and that happens in that poem,
It
right?
does.
Like it's the Hebrides, and there's a little bit of Arabian Sands, but it's about a girl on a farm near you,
Right.
which is cool.
Yeah, the passerby sees her, and she's solitary. She's out there. She must be, the image of beauty and represents all this goodness. And I think Wordsworth, Coleridge, they're kind of the first generation of the Romantics, right? Shelley and Byron and some of these go, they kind of take it, like you were saying, a little bit step further.
Right.
But yeah, so these are great.
So the delight that we are sharing right now is the delight that you can enjoy with our summer courses. So let's actually take a pause and make sure we read out the titles all nice and niftily.
Yes, absolutely. So this course by Andy Newman is called Creative Writing, Reawakening Wonder with Wordsworth, Hopkins, and Bradbury. And that's kind of, just in reading this, so much fun. And so Andy says that there was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight to me did seem, apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. Yet this wonder soon fades into the light of the common day. Can wonder be captured again, perhaps even in a deepened sense? And so he goes on in this, explaining that this is a creative writing course that is really centered on trying to recapture the wonder of imaginative literature, poetry, and fiction in ways that's meaningful. It's beyond just being utilitarian. It's beautiful and it's enriching and
Right.
inspiring. So.
And I've been doing a bunch of live interviews with teachers, and I have actually been really amazed to see how many teachers, and it might almost seem like go without saying, but it doesn't. It has amazed me. So many teachers are emphasizing the importance of wonder,
Right.
which is it's delightful. It
is.
Wonder and delight are an important part of a Christian education.
Absolutely. I think Wes Callahan said in that one video that we had done a while back, that when curiosity dies, that's the death of intellectualism, right? That's the death of the life of the mind. And so, yeah, the curiosity, the wonder that comes about, and this is what this course is about. And as you mentioned, it's very it's very easily priced at $225 for an 8-week course with a live instructor, and someone who is well versed and educated in the humanities and poetry. So this is this is going to be a fantastic course. The other one that we didn't pull out any passages, by far probably one of my favorite science fiction pieces is this space trilogy that is being offered by Dr. Brian Owens. And
Which was, by the way, a wonderful interview.
It was.
I really enjoyed that.
You folks, if you haven't seen it, you should look that up on YouTube on our Kepler channel. I think it's up there. So it's an excellent one. But it's interesting that it's called the Space Trilogy because Lewis hated that. Lewis didn't want it to be called the Space Trilogy. He wanted it to be called the Ransom Trilogy or something because the idea of outer space meant, it's kind of a modernist thought, that there's nothing out there that's outer space, but this is really the heavens.
Right.
And that's what this trilogy focuses on. So we get to take a look at worlds, an imaginative look at what would the world look like if there wasn't a fall, if there hadn't been a fall. Anyway, I don't want to give it all away because the 3 books there, Thukundra or Out of the Silent Planet is the first one. Very, it's so fun to begin with, and then the second one, Paralandra, gets a little deeper as they travel to this island, and we have this sort of Adam and Eve kind of character there. And then the last one, That Hideous Strength, brings the outer world or those nether worlds to Earth, and really has an eschatological bent to it that
for sure.
I think is very timely given some of the things we're seeing about our culture today. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
really cool.
And C.S. Lewis actually writes quite poetically, which I know is not something that we all necessarily think of when we think of Lewis. And actually, I really enjoy his collected short poems. He has a couple on his philosophy of science fiction, which is really interesting. But there's one poem in particular that is about Christmas Day, but it's galactic, right? And it starts in the heavens and ends in the heavens, but it's kind of, a chiasm where it crushes in on the earth, and this event that happens that changes the entire cosmos. Great galactal lords is one of the phrases in there. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lyrical element to Lewis as well that we weren't able to get into with this video, but Dr. Owens was definitely presenting this class in the interview as a great summer reading program. Hey, let's read this trilogy.
Absolutely. Fun one. If I was a high school student, I would be taking that class.
Yeah.
There's several of these I'd be taking. So.
You're not a high school student, dude. You have to get back to work.
I know. That kills me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much for letting us vlog at you guys, letting us read poetry to you. And as we were saying, we hope that you'll be able to share in the wonder of a classical Christian education through Kepler this summer and beyond.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
So long.